Hello, everyone. My name is Hayden Parrish. I am the host of the Ultimate Escape podcast, and I just wanted to welcome you. This is season 2, episode 1, and you may have noticed a couple of things have changed. I'm a new face, and in this episode, I'm just talking to Steve and giving introductions of who we are to those who are new and to those who have been here before. We are just recapping what's been going on since the last time Steve has recorded a podcast. I hope you enjoy this episode. Looking forward to the conversation. Ultimate Escape is a family-friendly ministry that addresses sexuality. Some episodes may contain sensitive terms and subject matter, especially for younger children. Okay, Steve, welcome.
Hey, good morning.
It's a different setting. If you've tuned into the podcast before, it looks a lot different than it was. It's we're in a new city. You're in Nashville now. Mm-hmm. I'm new. Tell us, Steve, more about where Ultimate Escape is, and kind of for those who have followed the podcast before, kind of update what's going on with Ultimate Escape.
This is the first time anybody's ever seen the podcast because it's always been an audio before. So this whole setting is new. So I'm excited about this. As far as the ministry, when we started Ultimate Escape, we were in Virginia Beach for a couple of years while I was in school, and then we transitioned to Nashville. So we were here from 06 to 09, and then we moved to the Allen, Texas area, and then to West Monroe, Louisiana, and we were there for about 5 years. So the transition back to Nashville has been like a coming home. I mean, Holly grew up in White Bluff, so it truly is literally a coming home for Holly. But it even feels like, for the ministry, it's been relatively easy to get reconnected in the area because we were here for several years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As far as what the ministry is doing, we're still doing what we've always done. Of course, recovering from the post-COVID, because speaking just shut down. We were, I think, in 2019 we had 63 presentations, and then in 2022, I think we had 23 presentations. So it obviously, the speaking is still in the building back up. We've had a very full first 4 months for 2024. So I've been excited about that. But, we still continue to provide counseling on a limited basis for people. Usually at this point, that's, people who are working through sexual trauma. My training is in sexual identity, addictive sexual behaviors, and sexual trauma. And Ultimate Escape basically works under one of those three umbrellas. But that's kind of where the ministry is at. Of course, my ministry partner, Legend, people have known Legend. We've traveled, she went to Canada with me. We traveled all over the United States. And a lot of people have seen that Transform Through Connection presentation with Legend. And about 3 tears start to come up right now. About 3 weeks ago, we made the decision that it was the day that we needed to put her down. She had developed lung cancer. Just tumors were all over the lungs on that last X-ray. Over about the last year, it had gone from one tiny dot to a really large, about a 5 centimeter tumor behind the heart on the lung, and then a bunch more. And so you and I were together in Mexico.
That's right.
In Cozumel. And as you were walking back that Friday night, I was tagging along with the group. And I got the phone call from Holly that Legend was not doing well. And then Legend kind of rallied on Saturday and Sunday. And I was just hoping I could get back home. That was my goal. By that point, by Friday night, I had tunnel vision. I want to get back home. To be able to say goodbye to Legend in an appropriate way. I had told her goodbye before I left because at her age, I'd been seeing signs for like 3 months. So I knew it was coming. So I was just trying to get home. But she kind of rallied Saturday and Sunday. And then Monday morning, so my flight back from Cozumel was to Dallas because I'd been in Dallas before the trip, and then I was just driving back home. So I spent the night, Sunday night, got up early Monday morning to hit the road, and I got a phone call in the first couple of hours. Holly was in the car on the way to the vet. Turned out that the vet said she thought Legend could make it one more night and be okay. So Holly brought her back home, and the three of us just kind of hung out for the evening and had a fairly normal night together. And then the next morning we took her in and said goodbye. But that's probably the biggest change with Ultimate Escape right now.
Sure.
Is, from this point on, if I do that presentation, it's going to be Gilly. Gilly's going to be new to that role.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I've just seen, when you did our college ministry, it was a small group at somebody's house, but just the way they responded to Legend and loved that was such a gift. So it's a huge loss to your ministry. But tell me how long Legend was a part of that ministry.
So Legend began. She took over for Baby Ruth. Ruth was my first Rottweiler. Mm-hmm. And used Baby Ruth for 6 years.
Okay.
And then I think Legend's first presentation, I believe, was 2015, if I remember right, in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then she's spoken with me for 8 years. Mm-hmm. Her last presentation with me was in Burns, Tennessee, in September or October of last year. So it was we had a long run.
Wow.
I couldn't tell you how many thousands of people have seen Legend speak in their church. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So for those, so a lot of people know your ministry, right. And with you coming to Nashville, and especially at Harpeth Hills where I serve, a lot of people are new to Ultimate Escape, your presentations, and this ministry. And I'm not just saying for Harpeth Hills people, but for people in our city. And so tell us a little bit about kind of the 20,000 foot view of the Ultimate Escape, kind of how you got involved in it, maybe even an introduction to who Steve is, because a lot of people it's like, well, I've heard him talk, but tell me a little bit more about Steve.
So the thimble version of that is I have no memory of life, basically no memory, a couple of snapshots, but my real memories start after somebody opened the door of sexuality in my world. I had a big piece of that puzzle emerge in 2017. But before 2017, I was just completely blank with who, exactly where. I knew the time frame. I knew it was by age 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. But somebody opened the door of sexuality in my world, and it wreaked havoc. I didn't know what to do. Basically used the phrase, I sure didn't want it. I didn't know what to do, but I was left basically holding I got to do something because it's created all these issues. And so I was the kid, the kid in the youth group that, on the outside, everything looked exactly like it should be. And it wasn't like pretentious. I wasn't pretending to be this good kid. That's who I was. But then there was this secret part that nobody on the planet had any access to. Compulsive sexual behavior, fantasy 24/7. I mean, I lived in fantasy world. And, if I could go 24 hours of that acting out, that would have been an anomaly. Desperately wanted to not do what I did. But by age 10, I felt guilty for it. Yeah. Before that, it was just shame. It wasn't really I know this is wrong. It was this feels dirty, and I'd be embarrassed if anybody found out. Yeah. But probably by the time I was baptized at 10, a lot of what was driving that desire to be baptized was I felt so much dirty and guilty for what I did. And that morphed in college years. It grew into a struggle with pornography, video stores. This dates me because a lot of listeners probably never set foot in a video store. But that's where I discovered this B-rated movie stuff, not XXX. The hardcore stuff was never a draw. It was way more on this just something that would enhance, give me an opportunity to have my fantasy moment and act out. And in the spring of 2002, ran across a ministry that's actually based in Nashville. I lived in North Carolina at the time, full-time youth minister, but it ran across Bethesda Workshops. And long story short, I ended up registering for a workshop and went. And I used the phrase "life began." I mean, I connected dots. I understood things I'd never understood. Realized I wasn't the only person on the planet, because there was a time, there were years, I thought nobody does nobody thinks the things that I think. And to realize, no, there are other people, and that there's a reason why I think the things that I do. And so about 2 years after going to Bethesda, we were doing the Rick Warren's book, Purpose-Driven Life. And so my prayer during that time was, God, if there's something besides youth ministry that you've prepared me to do, please help me see what that is. And then there was kind of a disclaimer, but I really like youth ministry, and I really like the church I'm at. It's like, if you've prepared me for something more, let me know. But don't forget, I really like where I'm at, and I really like what I do. And within weeks, the vision for Ultimate Escape developed.
Okay.
Again, long story short, I resigned my position as youth minister. We moved to Virginia Beach area so I could go to school at Regent University. Got my degree in counseling. And then we relocated back here to Nashville, thinking we would just, this is it. I mean, there were so many logical reasons why we would base Ultimate Escape here in Nashville. And after 3 years, we still weren't able to get settled. And I went to speak at a church in Texas. Again, a lot of conversation, but the thimble version, they said, man, we'd love to have your ministry here. We'll provide you an office. We're not going to financially underwrite the ministry, but we'd love to have you here at this church. We made the move to Allen, Texas, and we were there for 7 years. And they expanded staff, and they were just crunched for space, and they had to have the office back. So we were ministry homeless for about a year. Met one of the ministers, elders at minister and elder. He serves both roles at the WFR church there in West Monroe. And we were having breakfast in Dallas. He said, man, we'd love to have your ministry in West Monroe. Holly was looking at going back to school and ran across the program there at ULM in Monroe. And it actually was like the number 2 I think it was the number 2 nursing program in the country at that point. It was rated number 2. Johns Hopkins was number 3. And so it just worked out there that she could go to school there at ULM, and we could base Ultimate Escape at West Monroe. And then when Holly graduated and decided where she wanted to work at the hospital in Dixon. So, load up U-Haul, and here we are. So that's in a nutshell. That's kind of the journey of, Steve Holladay, and how it ended up starting Ultimate Escape, and kind of where Ultimate Escape has been through the years. And, that brings us to here today.
I love it. And I'm a new face, and so I think a part of this is really an introduction to, well, who's this guy with Steve?
So why don't you tell us who's Hayden?
Well, I grew up in Tennessee. I've been in Tennessee my whole life, and grew up in Memphis, so West Tennessee, and then moved to Nashville and did youth ministry in Jackson, Tennessee. That's where we met.
Yeah, we met in Jackson.
Baby Ruth was the focus point of your ministry, and it was so great. I just loved that interaction you had with those teenagers. But I think where this topic is really important to me is when I was in grade school, talking about sex in the family and in church was this really taboo thing, and really learned about sex from peers, and it was joking at a lunch table, and not really in this presented as this healthy and good thing, but something to be ashamed of, something to joke about, and really learning about this stuff in a very negative way. And so it kind of, looking back on it, of course I couldn't have understood this as a third grader or fourth grader, but looking back on it, I think it caused me to be ashamed and to just hide what my curiosity, knowing that, hey, this is something you joke about, and it's reserved for something that I'm not a part of, and I really can't ask questions. And so that's kind of how I operated from third grade into high school until my parents found a search history of mine on a home computer. And it was this moment where sort of my curiosity and my shame like reached a head. And it was one of the most humiliating moments of my life, but also a moment that I look back on that I'm so thankful that it happened. Even though it was, I felt the guilt, I felt the shame. I was met by two parents who linked arms with me. While I wish that we had that conversation much earlier than 15, 16 years old when I'm kind of in the middle of an issue, it's still like course corrected me and helped me kind of go, okay, hey, this is serious stuff and I can't keep this to myself. And it's really one of the things that I've seen play out so often in youth ministry and talking with parents. And I've told that story many times, and the conversations that I've had after that with both parents and students, with parents kind of saying, hey, this is kind of getting me out of this place of wanting to just shield them and not expose them to anything. But the reality is they're getting it at school and they're getting it among their peers. And so parents being the first people to present, hey, this sex is a gift from God, and helping parents do that. But then to have teenagers come up to me and said, I am so glad that you said that, and you struggled with something that I'm struggling with currently. And so me being, helping you in your ministry, I think is so valuable to what we're doing. I'm here in Nashville. I was a youth minister in Jackson at Campbell Street Church, and then was youth minister here at Harpeth Hills for 7 years. And recently, last year and a half, have worked in spiritual formation ministry, focusing mainly on college students and young adults, and some other kind of church-wide movements of formation, because really all of life is formative. And saying, how do we center ourselves on Jesus in those great moments, and also these moments that are painful and hard to deal with. Sometimes that we do and we're guilty of, but oftentimes it's something that happens to us, some wounding that we've experienced. And I see my role as a spiritual formation minister is to help give people tools to in both disciplines and cultivating a spiritual life with Jesus, but also to come alongside people in their wound, to show and point them to Christ. I think in Psalm 16 is one of my favorite psalms, and really a place that I find a lot of purpose in my ministry. It's a Psalm of David, and he's crying out to God, but the psalm doesn't end with this crying out and like, oh, woe is me. It ends with triumph and celebrating God's truth. But right in the middle, it's verse 8 of 16. It says, I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand, I will not be shaken. And like, that's what spiritual formation is about, is fixing our eyes on the Lord in every situation, in every stage of life. I currently find myself working with college students, helping them fix their eyes on the Lord, or young adults doing that. And in their transition moments, in their big decisions, these liminal spaces, and certainly talking about sexuality and trauma is one of those places that is spiritually formative.
And such a common thing in those years. I mean, those college years,
Sure.
young adult years. Talk about being right in the thick of all the sexuality stuff in our culture.
Yeah. So tell me, what is your hope for this podcast, Ultimate Escape, going forward? What is the thing that you want mostly?
I'm hoping that the podcast is able to reach a wider audience. Obviously, if I go and speak somewhere, I'm speaking to whoever shows up at that location.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas information we put on the podcast is available to people all over. Of course, you have to be able to understand English or get it translated, one or the other. But at least, that it's such a massively broader audience. And I like having basically a library of topics where if I'm working with someone, or if I get a phone call from someone, hey, I'm struggling with this. Well, okay, episode 9 of our podcast or episode 15 of our podcast,
That's great.
It gives people access to good information.
Yeah, and I think that's a big hunger for people who are trying to say, how do I have this conversation with my family? I know that's another reason it's huge. It's like, I've got young kids, and how do I navigate this really changing topic and do it in a way that affirms biblical truth, trust in God's wisdom for sexuality, and also in a way that's compassionate and loving. And I think a podcast and the more resources we can give parents and myself included, I think is huge. It's a huge value.
So earlier this year, I was speaking at a place, and one of the teenagers in the audience, after the presentation, went to his parents and said, I'm struggling with, I think I'm addicted to masturbation. It didn't involve any porn use, but in his words, I think I'm addicted to masturbation. And so I shared with the father, we have an episode of our podcast that talks about that topic. Why don't you guys listen to that together? And they did. And based on the information in the podcast, the son came back and said, I think for me, the role the masturbation has in my life is not a good role. And so it gave them just a springboard of where to go in conversation. And of course, we have other resources available, on our website in addition to the podcast. So there's a natural place that they can start learning. Okay, how do I deal with this addiction? What's underneath that? Because the behavior is the surface. I mean, yes, the behavior is sexual, and yes, the behavior is compulsive or addictive, but there's so much underneath that will be driving the compulsive to do something that, from a value standpoint, he's saying, as a follower of Jesus, I'm a teenager, but as a follower of Jesus, I don't feel like this is a healthy thing for me. And so to be able to start to unpack what's really underneath that gets past just trying to stop a behavior, but understand what's driving the behavior. To me, that's the value of the podcast. That when people are in the spot of there's something specific that I'm trying to address or figure out, there's a place they can go that has some good information to do that.
And that's what I'm really prayerful over of this podcast, is that people would use it, they'd find the conversation valuable, they would see it really an authentic, person who loves Jesus and is trying their best to help people, but also that they feel, oh my goodness, I'm seen. Whether it's somebody who is experiencing, an addiction or some sort of trauma from a sexual history, or somebody who's just saying, I'm just trying to navigate how to work with my children. I'm trying to navigate how to help a friend through this struggle. And that's my prayer over this. Steve, thank you so much for introducing yourself and catching us all up on what's going on.
Thanks for agreeing to be a part of the journey.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to our conversations together.